Howdy my totally as always tubular gamers, and we're back with, you guessed it, another ranking video. And today we're going to be doing a ranking video on the No More Heroes series. Yep, the No More Heroes series developed by Grasshopper and created by Suda51. We're looking at this wild ass series that I have a pretty decently long history with. So for the uninitiated, No More Heroes is a series of hack and slash games that follow Travis Touchdown, a huge fan of games, anime, manga, wrestling, who wins a beam katana in an auction and inadvertently becomes involved in the United Assassinations Association. And so he's forced to kill assassins higher in rank to prevent other assassins from targeting him. People love these games for their wild ass stories, Travis's goofy antics, some really violent hack and slash combat, a bunch of goofy minigames, and really just the tone and humor of all of these games are pretty on point. They're pretty just wild games. And over the years, I'd say No More Heroes is one of the craziest video game series just ever created. Like, these games just get absolutely nuts in just about every department. I'd say it's one of my favorite hack and slash series, and I've been there from pretty much the start all the way back on the Wii. It's Suda51's most famous game series, not even close. Sure, he has other games that are pretty famous also, like Killer 7, but No More Heroes is easily his most iconic series. So the series got started out way back on the Wii, where it was considered one of the best third-party titles released at the time, and we would get No More Heroes 2 releasing a couple years later for the Wii as well. After that, we would get an enhanced re-release for the PS3 that used the PS Move, and then it would actually be silent for many years, and people thought the series was over, but Travis came back with Travis Strikes Again, which was a very different type of hack and slash and more of like a spin-off than a main game, and people were hoping and they got what they hoped for. We did get a No More Heroes 3 just a couple years ago for the Switch, and now it's been released for all consoles and PC. In fact, the series is more widely available now than ever before, and so let's just get right to it. We're going to be ranking these games worst to best. We're going to be looking at all of them, giving all a little review. You know how it goes. Like, share, sub, comment, all that great stuff. Let me know your favorite No More Heroes down below, or your favorite character or moment or whatever it is. And let's just get right into it. Out of all these games, what do I think is the weakest of the No More Heroes series? And so here we have Travis Strikes Again, No More Heroes, releasing initially in 2019 for the Switch. So honestly, it was really strange when Travis Strikes Again got announced and subsequently released, because people didn't really want this. They wanted a follow-up to No More Heroes 2 if they were ever going to make another No More Heroes, and what we got was a very different kind of spin-off from what people expected. And Suda would say numerous times that this is not a direct sequel to No More Heroes 2, but would be a fresh start for the character Travis, and would eventually potentially lead on to No More Heroes 3, which it did. So the story's pretty weird. Taking place 7 years after No More Heroes 2, it sees Badman, the father of Bad Girl, an assassin from the first No More Heroes, tracking down Travis to take him out. And when he attempts to do so, they accidentally awaken this dormant video game console that Travis happens to have called the Death Drive MK2, and basically it transports them into the game. The two form a temporary alliance to get the hell out of there, and so they gotta go through a bunch of video games. The story's pretty weird. Like, even for No More Heroes, it's pretty weird, it's pretty out there, but I think it's actually alright. It has a lot of references to other Suda games, more than you would expect, especially Killer 7. They show up way more than I expected, and it was fun to see them and so many other references, and I think that the way the game progresses with its story is actually pretty good, and the ending definitely, it led up to No More Heroes 3, and I quite liked it. So while the story I think is alright, it's the gameplay where this game is really lacking, and compared to the other No More Heroes games, it plays a bit differently from the other ones. Rather than being just a straight hack and slash, this feels much more like a button masher action like brawler. The game is primarily played from a top-down perspective where you'll be just kind of running forward and getting into combat. The combat is nowhere near as advanced or in depth as the other games. It's very basic here. It's just kind of mash, mash, mash. You have like quick and heavy attack, and that's pretty much it. The combat's okay, it's serviceable, it's fine for what it is, but this game, what it does, it has a lot more than just the combat. It's a good thing too, otherwise it'd get pretty old, is the game has a bunch of other genres thrown in there. Sometimes it's like a 2D platformer, sometimes it's like an RPG. Really what Suda went and did is, since the game sees you going through a bunch of different video games, got a bunch of different video games from like the real world, a bunch of indie games into this game. So like Hotline Miami shows up at one point, this Not Metal Gear Solid shows up, like a bunch of different games basically show up in this game, and the game switches genres numerous times. I wouldn't say any of these genre shifts are terrible, but they're clearly not as good as the main combat, which was already not great. At least it keeps things varied. You're almost always doing something different. And something different this game does from every other No More Heroes is it actually is 2-player. It does have co-op. Someone's Travis, someone's Badman, and you both can absolutely go at it. I've never gotten anybody to try this game with me, and I wish I would because it looks like it's actually more fun, and I'd probably have more fun with this game. I wouldn't say this game is a bad game. I know some people really didn't like it. I would say it's just pretty average. It doesn't do anything really bad. It just doesn't do anything all that great. The combat, again, it's functional, and it does get kind of old. All the genre shifts are interesting, and it keeps things varied, but I wouldn't say anything's all that great. The story's alright. The presentation is pretty decent, but yeah, I would just say this game's alright. It just didn't grab me in the same way that any of the other No More Heroes games grabbed me, and again, the combat was just kind of alright. But if you like No More Heroes, then I think this is worth trying. Otherwise, you should just skip it. And now we have No More Heroes 3 releasing initially in 2021 for the Switch, but it's since been released for everything. Now, I was really excited for this one new mainline No More Heroes. This was a day one buy for me on the Switch, and I gotta say, I quite liked it. So the story's back to just being absolutely wild again. So it takes place a bit after Travis strikes again, and Travis is back in Santa Destroy, back in California, and really the whole town's kind of gone under some kind of economic redevelopment, thanks to an evil, slimy, corrupt CEO known as Damon, who got all of his power from aliens. Yes, aliens. This alien named Fu, when he was a kid like 20 years prior, and well, Fu comes back. Yeah, Fu comes back with all of his people this time, and Fu wants to take over the Earth. He kills the president and establishes a ranking system of all his best assassins, and so you know what Travis is going to do. He's going to go up that ladder and take all of them out after really he gets involved in a personal way, and that's really what the story's about. It's about Travis killing all the aliens to take Fu out. The story's actually pretty wild in this game, and it just does not let up really from the beginning. Like, the other games were crazy, but this is a different kind of crazy, bringing aliens into it. The game loves to just try to be like a Marvel movie, but like in the stupidest way possible, and I really enjoyed the story with this game. I enjoyed Fu, I enjoyed all the assassins. Travis is great that he's back. Some of the other characters return and they're cool. I just generally enjoyed everything to do with the story in this game. I thought it was all really great actually, and it was maybe the best aspect of the game. So when it comes to the gameplay, it tries to be a bit more like the older No More Heroes games with some modern tweaks. The game is still an open world hack and slash game where there's really two parts to it. See, just like the other No More Heroes, Travis can't just go fight all of them immediately. He can't just go up the ranking list like that. He actually has to pay the ranking fee, and you need enough money to pay the fee. So what you'll be doing is exploring around this open world and doing side jobs. These side jobs can include little mini games like where you're mowing the lawn just to make a quick buck, or some assassination missions. You can also explore the open world and find some hidden goodies in there as well. And yeah, that's pretty similar to the first game, and then once you make enough money or you'd go into an assassin mission, you get to the real meat of the game, the hack and slash combat, which is very simple compared to, say, Devil May Cry or Bayonetta. It's pretty similar to the first game. The combat isn't like really in depth with all these strings and combos. No, it's pretty simple to understand, and there's a couple different katanas you get, and a bunch of elements from the first couple games show up as well, only now you use the right stick since there's no Wii remote. And I think the combat is just as good as it's always been. It's still incredibly gory, it's still incredibly satisfying. You still have to recharge the beam katana, which will never not be funny. You have the slot machine that still shows up, you can still do the wrestling moves. Is there anything that's new in this game when it comes to combat? Yeah, there's the death glove from Travis Strikes Again, which allows you to perform a teleporting drop kick, and you can get 3 other moves for it. Now when you're just fighting the mooks, I mean, it's fine enough, but this game really excels with its boss fights. That's how No More Heroes has always been, and I think the boss fights are pretty fun in this game. There's some really good ones in there, more than just Fu, and Fu is amazing, I will add, as a boss. Like other No More Heroes games, the boss fights really are the highlight of this game, not only because they're incredibly entertaining before and after, but because the fights are actually just the most engaging, challenging, and just fun to play. And I gotta say, the combat is still quite fun. I mean, getting those good timing dodges so then you can just absolutely annihilate people and slash them in half, yeah, it's quite fun. The combat is not as in-depth as some of its other contemporaries, but I still think that it was more than satisfying. However, there are a few things that I do dislike. If you haven't noticed, I haven't really talked about the open world, and that's because honestly, it sucks. It's not very good in this game. It's incredibly barren, empty, uninteresting, and really not all that well designed. You drive around on the bike and you know it's fine enough, you can even fast travel if you want, but this open world, it's just so empty and lifeless and unexciting. it somehow has a worse open world than the first game, and it's less exciting than the first game's. Like, I just didn't really want to be in the open world in this game. I was like, wow, this is just surprisingly bad. I mean, maybe it wasn't that surprising. The first game didn't have a great open world, but that was on the Wii in 2007. We expect more from our open worlds now. Yeah, the open world is not very good in this game. The mini games, I could take them or leave them. I wouldn't say any are inherently awful, but I wouldn't say any are very good either. And then when it comes to the boss fights, you know, they're the best part of this game, but if you compare the boss fights in this game to No More Heroes 1 and 2, I'd still prefer the boss fights in those games. There's some good ones in here. I just think that the other games have better bosses. I also want to briefly talk about the presentation. The music is quite good. Not as good as 1 and 2's, but it's still good. The graphics themselves, though, yeah, it does have a really cool, unique aesthetic that is stylized, but I wouldn't say it looks all that good. And the frame rate and just general stability on the Switch was not very good. I know on the other consoles and PC it's totally fine, but the game still doesn't exactly look great. Despite all of that, I still recommend No More Heroes 3. I think it is still pretty good. And if you like the first 2 games, I really think that you should try this one, or if you're looking for a different kind of hack and slash that just goes balls to the wall crazy. And so here we have No More Heroes 2 Desperate Struggle, releasing initially for the Wii in 2010. I remember getting this game, you know, back in 2010, being pretty excited. I love the first No More Heroes. It was so crazy and weird, and I really wanted to see how they'd follow up with it. And I gotta say, No More Heroes 2, it definitely delivers. The game continues to follow Travis. Upon discovering that a corporation's CEO placed a hit on his best friend, Bishop, Travis rejoins the ranks to fight his way through an even greater number of assassins to confront his best friend's killer and attain his revenge. The story in this game, it's a lot more serious than the first game. It's a lot less goofy than the first game. It's not him just trying to get laid, and yeah, it really does take itself seriously. I think it's still quite good. I wouldn't say I like it as much as the first games. There's also these weird interview shots that you get throughout the game with clearly Sylvia talking. Don't get me wrong, I still think the story's good. I just prefer the first game's more lighthearted and fun nature. Well, as fun as a League of Assassins can be. Now, the first thing I want to mention outside of the story is that the presentation is a lot better than the first games. The first game definitely looked like a budget Wii game. This game has much higher production values. It's got a nice, cool aesthetic that even looks nice nowadays. So when it comes to the gameplay, it's still relatively similar to the first game. If you played the first game, you're going to feel right at home here. There are a few differences, and the game is streamlined in a few key aspects, but if you really did enjoy the first game, you're going to enjoy the gameplay here. It's still a generally light hack and slash where, you know, you still use motion controls, at least on the Wii, and they're good motion controls, I might add, to just kind of hack and slash your way through a bunch of different people and go through some awesome bosses as you try to become the top rank assassin. There are 4 different beam katanas to use, and they're all very different from each other. They all have unique movesets, attributes, skills, etc. You can switch between them whenever you want, and they all need a charge. Other things return like the death blows, the wrestling moves, slot machine, all that good stuff. It's all here, and I gotta say, I think the combat is actually pretty solid. It might even be better than the first games. The combat is just as good as the first ones, at least. I will say that the game has a lot more spongy enemies, especially towards the end of the game where these huge dudes show up and you will just be hacking away at these dudes for seriously like a minute or two, and it's like, how can you take this much abuse? But just some really spongy enemies. And then the big highlights of the fights of the hack and slash combat is the bosses. I think the bosses are actually pretty great here. Most of the assassins are not only memorable, but they're all different from each other. Some of them are throwbacks to the first game, but I think the bosses do enough to stand on their own here, and I think that they're some of the better boss fights in the series, except the final boss. The final boss is just awful in this game. It's considered like one of the worst final bosses in like any hack and slash, and you know, all these years later, yeah, I still hate the final boss to this game. But generally, the hack and slash gameplay, I'd say, is pretty good. When you're not in the hack and slash gameplay, you're not in the open world. They've actually nuked the open world here. Instead, it's just a menu, and you choose what side job you want to do right from the menu, whether it's the assassin missions, which are fine enough, or the new side gigs to make some more money. These are all totally different from the first games. They're all like 8-bit mini games, actually, outside of Scorpion collecting, which was like, it was like the worst mini game in the first game. And what did they do? They brought it back. They didn't bring back a single one except the Scorp. They knew what they were doing with this one. That is still shit. But the rest of these 8-bit mini games, I mean, they're here. I never really cared too much for them back then. Nowadays, I still don't really care for them. I mean, there's nothing inherently wrong with these. It's just, I don't know, I kind of liked how goofy and weird the first games were, and it just kind of adds more to that feel where I said there was more serious and less campy and just kind of playful At least No More Heroes 3 went back to the goofy real-life minigames. I mean, I'd say the 8-bit minigames and the side jobs in general are fine enough. The pacing seems solid enough in this game, and you'll find yourself regularly going from rank to rank in a pretty consistent manner. I think the pacing all around is good. So all in all, I would say No More Heroes 2 is still an enjoyable, fun, gory time where you'll have a decently engaging, serious story, some solid action, some nice music, a decent presentation, and some interesting minigames. And I have no problem saying that if you're looking for a hack and slash and haven't tried No More Heroes 2, maybe try it. Especially if you like the original, then you really can't go wrong with this one. It's available on the Switch and computer now, so you don't even have to play with the motion controls. And so here we have the original No More Heroes releasing all the way back in 2007, originally on the Wii. And you know, I gotta say, when it comes to No More Heroes 1 or 2 and which one I prefer, it's just kind of a flip of the coin, and I change almost day to day. It just so happens the day that I'm recording this, I prefer No More Heroes 1, but I could totally understand someone saying that they think 2 is the better game. Now, I remember when No More Heroes actually released on the Wii, and in the Wii circles that I was in, it was actually getting a lot of praise from people. See, it was actually a really good third-party Wii title. See, even back in 2007, most of the Wii's third-party support was just shovelware or garbage, and here comes this really gory, awesome game that people actually really enjoyed. And you know, all these years later, I still think No More Heroes kicks ass. So the story follows Travis Touchdown, an otaku who wins a beam katana in an online auction and inadvertently becomes involved in the United Assassins Association because he learns that he can actually get laid if he becomes the #1 ranked assassin, and so he's got to kill everybody that's above him. The story is pretty great in this game. Like, I really love this game's story. It's my favorite story in the series. Travis is just excellent. He's like just kind of such an asshole, and like all of his motivations has to do with literally him getting some poontang. His actions are all purely motivated by lust, and this dude is down bad. I am telling you, he is down bad. But the story, the setting, the characters, they're all great. The characters are just great. Other than Travis, I really did enjoy all of them. I think the writing is goofy as hell. It's a weird game, and the bosses are all great in this game. I have no problem saying I think the best cast of assassins are in this game. I think that this game is the best assassins, and I really just enjoyed the banter between Travis and them, all of them actually. And I think the first No More Heroes is just one of those rare games where I don't think there's a single bad character in it. I think everyone is good, and I really enjoyed just everything this game had to offer in terms of its story. So when it comes to the gameplay, there's really two parts to it. There's the hack and slash combat, and then when you're not in the hack and slash combat. I'll start with the hack and slash stuff. So it's not the most advanced hack and slash. Back when I played this on the Wii, which was the only thing you could play it on, you'd have to use the Wii remote and the nunchuck and use like motion controls to swing the beam katana. I always thought this was actually fine. I think it's a decent way that it's implemented, and it's responsive enough that it's not even a hindrance. With that in mind, the hack and slash combat, it's not super in-depth. I mean, it's not as in-depth as, say, Devil May Cry 4, which was about to come out around this time. There aren't these super long combo lists or strings or anything like that. It's not that kind of game. But what you can do other than your basic slashes is there are actually some physical moves you can do, you know, like some wrestling moves, which are always cool. There's a few other elements thrown in there like a slot machine or these death blows, and I think these keep the combat generally interesting. And what also keeps you engaged is just how gory and violent it is. Some of the finishing moves in this game just get absolutely brutal, and they just shoot blood like a volcano. Even all these years later, No More Heroes is still one of the most violent series I've ever seen. Like, there's just so much blood in this game. There's not any gore, just blood. Like, there's just a stupid amount of blood, and it definitely adds to the combat and how satisfying it is. A big part of the combat, when you're not just fighting the goons, are the bosses. I think the bosses are all great. They put up a good challenge, and they're all interesting. Fighting them, they're all different fights. Like, you have to approach them all differently, and you got to figure out their weakness or the best way to approach them. I think the bosses are all good here. Like, the only boss I didn't really care much for was the one where you had to use the environment to stop her from shooting the giant gun. I didn't care too much for that, but other than that, I really do like the bosses. I like the combat, and I think it's still good even all these years later. Now, when you're in the open world, it's a little bit of a different story. You drive around the open world in your giant-ass bike, and it controls fine enough. You can do some funny-looking drifts, and you gotta just really get enough money so you can go to the next fight. To get enough money, you do the assassination missions where you take out Pizza Butt, or you do the side jobs, which are these funky little jobs that Travis gets. I think the jobs, you know, they're pretty stupid. They have weird-ass control schemes, and they can be annoying to some people, but I find them still really endearing for the most part. For the most part, there's a couple that I really don't like in there, like The scorpion stuff is just stupid, but like mine finding, I hated finding the mines on the beach. But most of these I think are fun, they're goofy, they're silly, they made me laugh, and they're so short that it doesn't even really matter, and you get enough money so you only have to do them like once or twice. But I really didn't think these were a nuisance, and I didn't think driving around the world was much of a nuisance either. Yeah, it's not the most exciting, there's not a ton going on here. Really the only thing to collect are these balls that are hidden all over the place, but this was 2007, you know, I'm not expecting Grand Theft Auto levels of interaction with the world. This was a budget Wii game, and I still think it's okay. I think it's better than No More Heroes 3's open worlds, which is sad, but at the same time I could see why somebody wouldn't like this open world, because yeah, there's not a ton going on, and it sometimes can just feel like busy work driving from each spot. When it comes to other things I don't really care for, I'm not really too sure about the new versions, but I remember the frame rate sometimes would just get really bad on the Wii version, especially when there was a lot of blood. It just gets so choppy, and in an action game, a hack and slash like this, you really don't want that frame rate drop in. The presentation in general was just alright. It certainly looks like a budget Wii title. Like, it doesn't look very good. It didn't look great then. It certainly doesn't look great now. The models are all really just kind of lacking detail. Some of the environments look really low res, but I mean, at least it's got an aesthetic to it. But what I can endlessly praise is the music. The music in the first No More Heroes is so flipping good. Like, it blew my cock off with how amazing it was. Like, 2 and 3 have solid enough music, but 1 goes nuts. This game has a crazy amount of amazing music. Like, I am still regularly listening to the music of this game. It is so good. I've been playing it throughout this whole video. No, the music absolutely slaps. It slaps, it fucks, it definitely gets laid. It's so good. So when it comes to recommending No More Heroes, I really do recommend if you like action games, hack and slash character action games, and you want to try something different, something that's really out there, definitely go try No More Heroes. It's available on Switch and PC now. You don't even have to use the Wii motion controls, any of that. There's plenty of ways to play it in the modern day, and I have no problem saying go try it, because it's honestly one of my favorite games of all time. But I don't think it's the best No More Heroes. What do I think is even better than the first one? I think it's the enhanced re-release port of No More Heroes 1, No More Heroes Heroes Paradise, released for the PS3 in 2011. This really is the definitive version of No More Heroes 1, and in my opinion, the best No More Heroes game. Now, despite being an enhanced re-release, it doesn't really have that many extra features. The biggest feature is probably the better presentation. This game looks quite a bit better than the original release. It's probably the best looking No More Heroes game, even compared to No More Heroes 3, which is kinda sad. But I actually really do like the aesthetics. So the game could be played with the PlayStation Move, if you remember that thing. I never tried it with the Move. I played it with, you know, just a PS3 controller, where all the Wii Remote movements are with the right stick. And I mean, I thought the controls were fine. I think it works fine with a controller, and I still think that the game is still really fun. The game is still really satisfying, and everything I said about No More Heroes 1 just a few minutes ago really applies here. They do add a couple extra things, like you can now fast travel to already finished jobs, which is nice. You can also retry side jobs, which you couldn't do in the original. You'd actually have to head back and then restart it and drive back. There was a little bit of extra driving in there, and they got rid of that, so that's nice. They've actually added some bosses from No More Heroes 2, which is pretty cool, including the one that always suspiciously looked like Cloud Strife. You can actually replay bosses and cutscenes now. They even added like a score attack, and they tried to make the open world feel a little more alive, and the way that they did this was actually adding a decent amount of NPCs. Well, I don't know if I'd say it makes it more alive, but there's more to look at, I guess, while you're driving around the open world. I'd say that if you're going to play No More Heroes 1, this still is the definitive version of the first game. It's not the most accessible since it's still only on the PS3, but I'd still say it's the definitive version. But really, in the end, you just can't go wrong with No More Heroes 1, whether it's on the Wii, the Switch, the PS3, or PC, wherever you're going to play it, you can't really go wrong with it. No More Heroes is a pretty crazy series, and I quite like all of them. Are we going to get a No More Heroes 4? I'm sure at some point we will. Travis will be old as shit by then, but we'll probably end up getting one day, and I'll be there day one for it, just like I was for 3. If you like hack and slash games, this is a great series to try out. Anyway, that's it for this video. Hope everyone has a wonderful day, and see y'all next time. Bye-bye.